Some other people might still come in, but I'm going to get started. This is going to be a really interactive one as well, so I'm really hoping to have more of a discussion today. I'm really excited to be here. This is such an awesome group of people, and yeah, I love the idea of this, and it's great to see all of you. Yeah, I'm not sure how much you know about this presentation, but I'm really excited to talk with you all, and I am going to do the thing where I read from slides, but I love having feedback from people, and I love having people interrupt me to add their voice to the conversation, and to, if I don't see you trying to get my attention, put your hand up, and yeah, I'd really love for this to be more of a discussion rather than just a presentation. Hi, Kevin. So we do have a first part that's a little bit of background and information, and we'll have a break in the middle to do some reflection and some questions, and the whole second part is really up to you guys. So we have, I think, an hour, just over an hour?
An hour and a half.
An hour and a half. So there's lots of room, sorry, this one's sleep again. There's lots of room for discussion at the end. And yeah, and it's kind of a choose your own adventure. So the second half will be about what you guys want to talk about based on what you learned in the first half. So the topic that I'm presenting on today is called Understanding Trans and Gender Diverse Experience and Supporting Authentic Gender Expression. That's just for you guys. So today, first of all, we're going to explore some of the lexicon related to the realities of trans and gender diverse communities and queer communities as well, the overlap there. We're going to reflect on access, allyship, and inclusion practices. And this is something that you'll be able to take into a lot of different environments. It's developed to be really transferable between school environments, the workplace, even with your roommates. So it's really scalable. We're going to look at medical and non-medical gender transition options, what that looks like in this particular moment in time. We're going to explore our relationship to gender and what gender affirmation means to us. And yeah, we're going to hopefully leave some space for you guys to ask some questions. I know that it can be really difficult sometimes to ask questions. We're not really sure what's okay to talk about and what's not. So yeah, I want this to be somewhere where you can feel free to ask things that you feel might be kind of silly. That's not real. Okay. So here are some questions that we're going to be reflecting on today. What does it mean to be gender diverse, especially in this place and time? We're at a really historical moment for gender diverse people, and what I'm talking about today is really situated in what's going on currently. How can we support gender diversity in ourselves as trans and cis people and in the people around us? How can we use the information to make aligned choices around relationships and interactions? So there's a lot of practical advice at the end on how you can show up as an ally, or as a trans person for another trans person, for that matter. Also, how we can advocate for policy change that supports well-being of our gender expansive experiences. So like I said, there is a whole section where we can talk about advocating for policy change in educational spaces, in workplaces, and NGOs, wherever you guys are. So this is a little bit about me. I'm Ray, I use they, them pronouns. So my background is actually in sociology, but I started a company called Origami Customs 15 years ago. Yeah, what do I say about it? It's a brand of clothing that caters to the gender diverse community, mostly by making gender-affirming lingerie, but it does a lot more than that. And I was one of the forerunners of the movement to create gender-affirming clothing, but also policy and a framework for trans employees 15 years ago. So yeah, a big part of the work that I do is not just creating garments that we sell through a website like any other shop. I also run a tandem community program, which we'll get a little bit more into later, that disperses gender-affirming garments to people who lack access for free. So a little bit about where my work has traveled so far. So we've been in lots of publications, sadly not currently because of a lot of trans stuff in the news that makes it really hard to be a trans person online. But yeah, we've been featured in a lot of really wonderful spaces. I lead educational workshops for organizations and healthcare programs, insurance companies, a lot of places that are trans-specific, like Point of Pride folks and Plume, which are like the big names in gender-affirming healthcare in the States. And then I also work with educational organizations, healthcare providers, universities, insurance companies, grassroots organizations, kind of across the board. So that's where my educational work has taken me. And this is a little bit more about the company that I formed. Yeah, so for 15 years we've kind of been leaders in trying to figure out how to create both like ethical and sustainable gender-affirming garments, like kind of the trifecta that we want to hit, and it's been really challenging. I started off doing this business when it was just myself. I didn't have any employees, and now we're a group of 9. Everything is made here in Montreal by a team of queer and trans people. So not only did I have to figure out how to do this like ethically and from the community for the community, I had to figure out how to run a company that specifically works with employing trans people and how that works differently from any other company that I had seen before. So really scaling from the ground up. What is really important about the company to me is that anything can be for anyone, and that means across the board there's no binary, especially with underwear. This is really, really hard to achieve. So we have like not only customized garments by people's measurements that they send to us, but also in what's called like a gusset selection. That basically means that anyone can wear anything regardless of what's in their pants. So that was really important to me from the ground up, making sure that we inherently get rid of the binaries that are built in, especially in the fashion world, but in a lot of other areas as well. And we decided to create trans-affirming policy, which had pretty much never been done before when we started talking to insurance agencies. Like, what does it look like to have healthcare for trans people specifically? And so we've created frameworks and policy and healthcare and integrations that look at how we can support safely trans and gender diverse staff, which is a lot of what we'll get into in a minute. Any questions so far? Am I talking too fast? Okay, great. So like I said, we are a retail company, but we have this tandem community program. So I started this about halfway through the journey when I realized that, like, yeah, it's great that people have gender-affirming garments, but to make them ethically, they have to be not super, super cheap. And that's not accessible and affordable for everyone, especially people who are facing like overlapping oppressions, have limited access in so many different ways. And so I started a community program. Now we work with about 100 different organizations and retailers across the globe. And basically this gets gender-affirming, healthcare, these garments. And I've built up this network over about 7 or 8 years. Really, really proud of it. It's kind of unheard of in the industry. We donate about 500 pieces for free to gender diverse folks across the globe. And these organizations, they really range in a lot of ways, but they're working at intersections where people are most likely to lack access. People living with racial oppression, homelessness, HIV/AIDS, immigration status, persecution under the current transphobic policies, especially in the United States. You all know the drill, all of those reasons why we can't get the things that we need. Cool, so I'm just gonna go over like a quick glossary of the definitions of these things, and most of it you're probably really aware of, but I just wanna make sure that everything that I'm saying makes sense to everyone. So transgender people, when I say that, what I mean is people identifying with a gender that's different than the one that you were born with. It's a pretty umbrella term. Cisgender is the opposite of that, so someone whose gender identity aligns with the one that they were assigned at birth. Gender assigned at birth is kind of exactly what it sounds like, whatever the medical staff decided that you fell under in that binary. They probably use a very antiquated genital measuring system to find that out about your body. Gender diverse is a great term that I use a lot in my work. It's a little bit more expansive than transgender, but it basically means anyone who's not cis. It also includes transgender people, but some other identities under that as well. Transintegral is something that I use in my work, and what it means is that we're putting care for trans people at the forefront, and we're building it in from the ground up, so it's never an afterthought. It's never like, this is an organization, plus we thought of trans people, and we made this one accommodation for you. So it's leading with that. Like I said, we are trans people working for trans people, so that's the baseline. Medical transition, when I'm talking about that later, we're referring to procedures and medicine that someone may choose to affirm their gender. These can be reversible, they can be irreversible. And it's important to note that those don't always have end goal of like changing gender or like switching gender, but just can be like tools in a toolbox that people use to feel good about their bodies. Building on that, non-medical transition options. So these are tools that people can use either on their own or with medical transition options. Again, it's just things that make you feel really good about your body. We'll get into some options that people can choose from later. But that's an important distinction. Gender affirming is anything that makes you feel good and aligned with the way that you see yourself in your body. Gender dysphoria is probably going to be really unique for everyone experiencing it, but it can feel like being misaligned, uncomfortable with the state of the gender that you're experiencing in your body, maybe not liking what you feel when you see yourself in the mirror, maybe feeling like you don't want to be perceived, and anything that kind of is similar to that. On the other side, we have gender euphoria, which is great. There's this phrase that a leather worker in the States that I know use experience of elation, of feeling right, of feeling like your insides match your outsides. Yeah, that you can really show off your own internal gender expression and that you're being seen the way that you want to be seen in the world. So yeah, go ahead.
I apologize for my lack of education in this,
That's
but in the first slide you said you're trans and non-binary. So how do those work together? Yeah,
so there's a lot of different identities that are like similar and overlapping. Here, trans is kind of an umbrella term that's commonly used to identify a lot of people with different identities that are not cis. So a non-binary person could also call themselves trans as like the higher level descriptor. Gender diverse also covers all of the above. So as a trans person, then like subcategory, I am non-binary.
Oh,
and that might be the same for other people, but a lot of people also like tend to self-identify in lots of different ways. It's similar in the way that we talk about queerness. Like there's a lot of different descriptors and some overlap and some don't, and we don't really have great like umbrella terms to catch everyone. So is that
yeah, it does.
Cool. Go ahead.
I know someone that told me that they had species dysphoria. Does everything still apply in the same way to them?
I'm not really familiar with that as much. I think it's probably really individual to that person. I'm not sure where their experience would fall under this. It seems like it would be like not a cis experience. So they're probably dealing with some of the same experiences, but again, it's going to be like quite individual. Yeah. Sorry, I don't know more about that. Any other questions before moving on? Cool. So, not just trans people experience gender dysphoria. Not everyone experiences gender, full stop. There are agender people, but mostly today we're going to be focusing on people who experience gender in their bodies, and that includes cis and trans people. So it's something that gets left out of the conversation a lot is that there are practices in which cis people affirm their gender all the time, but they're not always seen as gender affirming care. So for example, some medical transition or medical gender affirmation tools that cis people use could include hairline correcting surgeries, steroids, Viagra, plastic surgery, Ozempic, all of these things that people use to feel good in their bodies, to feel affirmed in their gender. And there's tons of non-medical ones as well that very commonly we don't see as being gender affirming, but makeup, push-up bras, shaving, waxing, hair removal, microblading, tattoos, all of these things are tools that we use to make the outsides match the insides. So if anyone is feeling super brave, are there any things that you feel like you could add to this list of ways in which people, cis and trans in the world, update their bodies, add to their bodies, using tools either within the medical system or, yeah, go ahead.
Fashion.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Fashion's a big one. Like everything that we put on our body is to represent how we want to be seen.
Piercings.
Yeah, for sure.
Haircuts.
Haircuts, yeah.
voice and the way that people will talk.
Yeah, that's a huge one. Definitely voice modulation, talking differently. If I'm like really excited and I want to be heard like this, versus like a voice that I might use differently in different situations. I know that when I go into a bank, I really like put on a customer service voice and I can hear it, and then I go like, oh, it's because I want to be seen in a certain way in this space. Anyone else?
Hormone replacement call.
A lot of people use hormone replacement therapy when they're going through menopause, like a cis person going through menopause. Obviously, trans people use that as a wonderful tool for transition, but it didn't start with use for trans people. It started with cis people. At the back?
Blue hair dye.
Yeah, blue hair dye. Good choice.
It, like heels and like platform shoes.
Yeah, for sure. Playing with height differences, wanting to be seen as taller. Yeah, for sure. And also just fashion.
Well, fitness and like weight training.
Totally. Yeah, modulating your body through like, yeah, like weight is a big part of it, but I think also like building muscle and like the ways that people want to like bulk up or be seen as like a different shape, take up presence.
I don't know if it counts, but also like breast reduction surgery.
Totally. Yeah, that's a huge one. It's another thing that we see as being like a gender-affirming surgery, especially with the mastectomy, but for sure a reduction that is very common in the cis world. I talked for too long. Yeah, anyone else?
Sort of on that with binders.
Yeah, for sure. That's a big part of the gender affirmation stuff that we're going to talk about, but it's also something that can be used for not trans people for lots of reasons. I know a lot of people who buy my binders who have like more chest tissue who aren't trans who just say like, I want to work out and feel more comfortable in my body. I want to be seen in a certain way, and that's partly probably because of the way that they want to present their gender. Absolutely. Anyone else? Specific gender-affirming care. Gender-affirming care saves lives, full stop. It drastically reduces depression, suicidal ideation, and so many other things that affect transgender youth, gender diverse youth. Like some of you said, some really good examples of things that are specific to the trans and gender diverse community involve different surgeries, like you said, maybe a breast reduction or a mastectomy, things that are commonly referred to like as top or bottom surgery, but that is actually like a whole host of different procedures. HRT and hormone blockers. In the non-medical side of things, we have things like someone brought up vocal training, wigs, prosthetics, hair implants, makeup, clothing, tape. There's like other, there's brands of tape which help with gender affirmation, sometimes called trans tape. You know what I'm talking about. Gender affirming clothing obviously is my specialty. So the main categories that we're talking about there include things like gaps and binders, packing undies, harnesses, and things like that you might have seen. So both medical and non-medical transitions are life-saving healthcare. And I think it's really important that we talk about this, especially in this moment, where, as we know, in the States, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, what's a gap?
That's a really good question. I will get into that in a second. Yeah. But yeah, like right now, non-medical transition options are bearing a lot of weight because of the lack of access that especially youth, especially in the States, are facing. It's really, really going to be more and more important that people can access safe gender affirmation that's not medical. Yeah, so I'm sure you've been on the internet lately. We hate it and we love it. Trans rights and access to trans healthcare is being rolled back in many of the states, as we know. This blocks access to gender-affirming care, especially for youth, kind of across the board, more in some states than others. Mutilation, which is an act that just got proposed in the Office of Health and Human Services, and it has new guidelines for promoting the health of children who assert gender dysphoria or other gender identity-based confusion. They're actually rewriting the DSM-V, which catalogs trans people as a mental disorder. So a lot of the way that we talk about gender affirming care in policy has to do with regret rates. You'll see this come up a lot as a talking point. And so this is just to talk about, as you can see on the left, 1% of people regret their gender-affirming treatment. It's actually just under 1%. The regret rate along all surgeries, across all surgeries, is about 14%. More people regret tattoos, hip replacements, breast implants, like the list goes on and on. It's very, very rare that people detransition or feel regret about making these decisions in their bodies. Yeah, often when we see these children especially talked about in the media, especially in the American media, it's talked about as mutilation. Yeah?
I also was like, when I read about this, about the 1% of regret and like detransitioning, I was hearing that it was a lot about their social situation and how their actual, like that transition encouraged that detransitioning. Is that ever represented in stats like these?
It's really hard to say. I feel like it's more common now than it's ever been, especially when people are like seeking safety by like maybe making their body or like gender marker match the way that they like most would find safety. And I think it's kind of too new to have a lot of data around that. Yeah, I mean, detransitioning is kind of like a hot topic and there's not a lot of like really good stats around it. I think personally that people choose a lot of options to access safety when they have to for self-protection.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm not sure how that factors into
No,
1%, but yeah,
sure.
it's a super important part of the conversation. Yeah.
I also remember hearing that part of the 1% was people discovering later they were non-binary.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I would think that would be absolutely true. Being like, oh, that surgery like wasn't quite the thing that I wanted, and yeah. And I know a lot of people who like make different decisions throughout their lifetime. It's not static. You know, people who go on HRT and then decide to stop for a while and go back on for different reasons throughout their life. So it's really like a fluid line. It's not going from a point A to a point B.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that because it's always seen as like switching gender or like only this gender can do this, and then if you want to be this one, you have to do this.
Yeah.
But I think it would be helpful for all of us to move towards a view on like existing as humans where we can do what we need to do to match how we feel inside, and it doesn't need to fit in a box.
Yeah, I absolutely 100% agree. And if you have like one takeaway from today, it's probably that. You know, we get to pick and choose. The choices that we make are situational in the time and place, and they're culturally informed, and we do them to feel the best that we can about our body in that time and place. That's gonna shift and change as like all of our identities shift and change as we age, as our like ability and disability changes over time. There's like so many different factors that play into that. Yeah, okay. You can't read this because my my talking points are over top of it. Oh, I can't read it either because my talking points are over top of it.
I think you can move it.
Can I?
Yes, if you click on it, I think you can move it around.
If
you want to read it.
I've got so much to talk about. That's a lot to get through. So, okay, now we've kind of talked about what gender affirmation means, medical and non-medical care. This is kind of the intersection. And I'm going to go back to what someone said. They were asking about gaps and binders specifically, because I do want to explain that before we get into more policy stuff, in case anyone wasn't clear. These are the things that I make, so I could talk for hours about them. But a binder is a type of compression top that you wear to move or flatten or compress chest tissue. Some refer to that as being like more masculinizing, but a lot of different people choose it for different reasons. A gap is a compression garment for the bottoms. It's a type of underwear. And for anyone that has a penis or any other type of genitalia that wants it to be more compressed, it can be called feminizing, but like doesn't necessarily have to be about looking like a woman. It just has to be about feeling comfortable and confident in your body. And the other thing I had mentioned was tape, which is another really common practice, both for like external genitalia and for chest tissue, where you're kind of using a strong, kind of like a KT tape, if that is a good reference point, to move and compress tissue. Both are really great ways of using tools for gender affirmation that you would choose for different reasons. A whole other talk on that. And packing bottoms and harnesses, when they're referring to that, it means something that you would use a prosthetic, like for external genitalia, that you could like wear under your clothes to put it in. Another thing that I will add to that list is maybe bras that also hold like a breast form or a prosthetic. Those are kind of the main clothing gender affirmation tools in that category. Okay, so as I was saying, these are tools that we can pick and choose from. They're really relative to time and space, right? We're gonna need these at different times in our lives to access safety, to pass. For anyone who doesn't know that term, is really like being seen as the gender that you want to be seen as, ideally all the time. So when we say passing, it means like no one has any idea that I'm a trans person. I'm like really living as and being seen as the gender that I want to be seen as without being like clocked as a trans person. Sorry, I hate that word. So, for example, someone who's trans femme might choose to wear a gaff or something like breast forms if they work from home, which is actually what we saw a lot during COVID. But they're gonna get more femmed up if they're going into an office because of the way that they're gonna be perceived, the way that femininity is tied to like professionalism, where they might not feel like they need to present themselves in a certain way. I mean, conversely, there might be a person who feels like they can experiment with those gender affirmation procedures in the privacy of their own home as a way of trying it out first and seeing if they're comfortable before moving into the world. So, lots of different reasons. But bans on access to medical gender-affirming care make people feel more reliant on non-medical options and prosthetics. Like I was mentioning at the beginning, this stuff becomes really, really important when people don't have access to surgeries, when they don't have access to hormone replacement therapy and things like that, which is harder and harder to access. Youth are often facing way more barriers to things like this. And like I was saying before, in the work that I do in getting these products out to people, we've got people with intersecting identities that make it so much harder to access care. So like with what we were talking about before, homelessness, HIV/AIDS status, immigration status, racial oppressions, fatness, these are all things that make it way harder to convince a doctor that you need to get gender affirmation care, to find support systems, to access things in your language, all of these things that make it really challenging right now. So, that's kind of like the background that I wanted to share with you. So here are some reflection questions. We're going to pause here for a bit. I'm going to read the first one out loud, and I'm going to give you guys a couple of minutes, and feel free to like chat with people around you or like take some notes if you'd like. It's going to inform the way that we do the next section. So if anything comes up for you, we can stop here to have a bit of discussion around this stuff, and then we'll see what you guys want to dive into more. So as trans people, how do we experience gender euphoria and dysphoria in relation to the space that we're in? What makes it easier to exist as our authentic selves? I'm going to give you like 1 minute to just sit with that. Think about how it feels in your body or experiences that you've had. What comes up when you think about gender affirmation in your own life? Are there examples from before that resonated with you? Let's give you guys all very briefly. And this is a two-part question, so you read the trans one if you're trans and read the cis one if you're cis. So how do we know that we're cis or trans? Yeah?
It's really like tough, and well, for some people it's not, but for others it can be tough, and you have to do like a lot of self-exploration and talk to friends and such and try to figure that out.
Yeah.
And for some it's like they know right from the start, so it depends on who's experiencing it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's shifting over our lifetimes for sure, and it's really challenging to figure this stuff out. I mean, that's why I'm asking. It's not always obvious, so we don't know why we feel the way we do. Go ahead.
I think a little bit adding on to the why it's so tough, at least from what I've seen, is like the different levels people have between like physical dysphoria versus like societal or social dysphoria. Because I know for me at least, like the physical dysphoria is whatever, but it was the social aspect that was really difficult to navigate. Of like, I don't know, do I feel the way that people see me is reflective of, I don't know where that sentence is going.
No, I know what you mean. I know what you're saying. Do you find, sorry, if you don't want to answer it, I won't put you on the spot, but do you find yourself like acting in different ways or choosing different tools, maybe in different social environments because of like societal pressure in different spaces?
I mean, I was kind of always like the dipshit who pushed back against that. But it was like, again, like, like, I guess that is sort of a way of reacting to it, right?
Yeah.
Like, less, it's still like, it hurt in a similar way as like choosing to, or I guess going along with what people want.
Yeah.
Like both ways of reacting to people telling you to do something that you don't want to do still hurts you in that way, right?
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for sharing. It's super real. Go ahead.
For me, I think I understand that I'm cis because I've never felt all the insecurities I've had. It's never that I don't belong to myself. So that's one way I can understand that I'm cis.
Totally. Being able to position yourself in like, I'm hearing about this experience. It doesn't seem like something that I've had before. Yeah, trans people being like, oh, that seems quite different.
I think also, like, as a cis woman, sometimes it's hard to say, like, if you're having, you want to explore gender or you're just angry at gender norms. Because sometimes I'm like, am I attracted to this or am I just like pissed off that I don't get to do this as a woman?
So it's like doing it as a bit of a
Yeah, it's like
protest
sometimes
because-
confusing. You're like, is this what I want or do I want to be able to do that but still as a woman?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. Like, can we advocate in other ways beyond making sure that we can show up in those ways? Like, how also can we push the boundaries of like making sure that others get to show up, even if like I don't want this particular gender affirmation procedure, like making sure that others can get it. Yeah.
Sort of going back to why it makes it so hard to be trans.
Yeah.
That, like, throughout your entire life, like I think a lot of people can relate to this, where like you have certain tendencies when you don't like. You hate a certain aspect of your body or yourself, whatever, and you just attribute to, oh, that's just one thing that I do that I just don't like, and you don't know why you're doing that, but you just do it, and then eventually, like, you come to a point where you realize, oh wait, that's because of this reason, or you're trans, or like that. So
Yeah.
and then when you're doing more, it's a lot of self-reflection also.
Totally. I think like you're saying, I think it's a combination of like the internal work and then also having like external education and seeing other people being like, oh, this person describes himself in this particular way, or they were able to do these procedures or self-identify or wear this, and you're like, oh.
It's also just like the internal biases that you have, or the like transphobia that you may have that you just don't know that you have as well. So,
Yeah.
like, it's a lot of self-reflection and
Yeah, I really agree with that, and it resonates with me as well. I feel like I didn't know about my gender until I started realizing what other people's genders and gender presentations were, and then it kind of like reinformed or like went back and forth. Like, oh, I think that this is, I'll still something missing, and then you meet someone and you're like, oh, you've got the thing that I want. Okay, I'm also that a little bit, like, pick and choose. At the back.
I think it can be a really hard question because it may not even be easy to figure out what you might want, like what it is that you might want to be, because there's obviously the binary like that you can choose from, and there's like a plethora of non-binary things, but it could also be any mix of anything, or something that doesn't necessarily have a label.
Yeah, it's exciting and terrifying.
But it's just like figuring out and like which one feels like it fits best just can take so much time that you may not be able to, like, you may think, hey, well, I might just be like cis and just be confused, or
I mean, that's also fine. I think you can see it as being confused, but you can also see it as like an exploration. You know, like we're always updating, even if the end thing that you find out is like I'm still cis. It's like, how do I want to be cis in the world? You know, does that mean using like typical things of my gender, or does that mean incorporating some things? Like that doesn't necessarily make me a trans person, but like it's always going to be an evolution, and that's like fun, but also hard and scary, especially when you don't have examples, right? At the back.
The more that I sit here, the more that I'm like putting myself down a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
But I was like thinking like, oh, like I'm just a woman, and I was like, but like what? For me, like, and I'm like, I can't think of anything because I don't really see anything or doing activities as like genderized.
Mhm.
That drives me nuts. But I grew up with all brothers in the woods hunting, whatever, and I'm in a male-dominated field.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, well, like I don't know if there's anything that fits, but I also don't like to assign. Like if I were to say like makeup, I don't even wear makeup. But let's say I don't want to say like, oh, I feel like a woman because I wear makeup. It's like anyone can wear makeup.
Yeah,
Like,
that's
so
why
I'm like so confused.
Yeah.
And I'm like going in circles and I'm like, what?
This is why this is a really challenging question. I feel a bit mean asking it,
Like
but
this is the
it's
first
true.
time anyone's asked that.
Yeah.
And thank you for asking it. But I was like, oh my God, like what?
It's because it's really hard to describe when we're not talking about our external sex characteristics, when we're not talking about, makeup and clothes and all of these things that are like gender affirmation on the external. Like, what is it that makes up these like categories of men and women? Like, they are kind of made up. They're like a product of our society and the place and time that we live. You know, and if we had been born at a different time in a different place, they would be completely different ways of seeing ourselves as men and women and everything in between, right? Here.
Yeah, I never know how to word this properly, so it's going to be a bit of a mess.
That's okay.
But like for me personally, my gender identity has always been tied to my sexuality because I'm a lesbian. And just like the way that like I understand like gender expression, and like I said this a lot today, is we live in a society that's like very patriarchal, and it's like I know we've moved a lot away from like what a man is and what a woman is just in general, but the way that it's like the identities are inherently tied to how they interact with each other, and just like being outside of that because you're not like involving men in your life by being a lesbian, it just like makes it really complicated because like you have like certain identity to womanhood, but it's also I don't identify with womanhood in that way because I don't interact with men in the way that like the average like in our society the way that women are supposed to.
Sure.
And I find that really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, queer womanhood is really its own identity as well, with its own like rich history and structure around it, what you're presenting and what you're being in the world and everything. So I understand how like even these categories of men and women are like not as black and white as we thought that they were going to be. There's a lot underneath of those categories.
It's kind of tied to that too, but mine's more about like what is marketed to us as gender. Just because like myself, I am non-binary with more like a masculine presenting side, but that's not on purpose. It's just like there's so much within what is like masculine I'm a more like slender frame, so I fit more into feminine clothing, but like the masculine fit is just that within even the category of man, there's so much sizing that I think it's confusing to me. Do I want to have the bulky, athletic, masculine build, or do I want the slender male build, or do I want a more feminine athletic? Like it's just the range, like men and women as an umbrella term makes it also just that much more confusing. And like I really appreciate hearing about like gender-affirming clothing, because for myself it's a lot of altering that I'll do to make something fit myself more personally. But yeah, so just that umbrella term and the marketing of this is male, this is women, with such a wide range within those is just muddies the waters more. Yeah.
No, absolutely. I think that's a really good point too. Like even within men's clothing, you're being seen as like a very different type of man if you wear like a baggy pant versus like a very tight pant, you know, even, like, and that might also tie into like the way that like a sexuality is being presented in that. It's not clear cut, and that really means something to everyone individually, and so you never know how people are going to make assumptions about men's clothing particularly, so in general.
Yeah, just adding on to these last 3 comments, I heard something recently. It was from a very academic source called RuPaul's Drag Race. And it was talking about a contestant that was the first ever straight contestant on RuPaul's Drag Race. And everyone was shocked because this person looked typically gay. And this kind of also relates to gender as well, that we're all taught that queerness can look a certain way and that can look a variety of ways. But we're taught that straight and cis looks one way. So that adds on to the whole exploration. You can still be cis and explore, and people typically don't consider that. And I think that's very important as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that anyone who's really like solidly in a cis and straight identity too, even though that's like kind of its own thing, will get seen as gender deviant if they're straying from their norms. Whereas I think like there's a precedent that in the gender diverse world there is a range, but still there's a rigidity within cisness, where like if like someone who's like, I am a cis man, were to wear a dress, it's very transgressive, whereas it might not be in different identities in different spaces.
Also, one more thing to add, it's about clothing again, but it's like the expectation for women to dress more masculine in like business settings with like pants and like just like that sort of style, I think also for myself is confusing. Just because I like the more feminine version of everyone, not just men. For myself is hard. It's difficult as like a masculine presenting person. So yeah, my own experience just it's. That masculine lens makes things, again, weird.
Yeah, I'm thinking about like, and you guys tell me like you're in engineering programs, like the way that women are going to be seen as more professional when they're wearing more like traditionally men's clothing in that type of environment. You see that all the time, right? Wearing like a suit to school is going to be different than wearing like a very flowy dress to an engineering. Like, do you guys experience that particularly in like what's traditionally a very like male-dominated space? I'm seeing everyone be like, oh my god, yes. Okay, this is not my world, so I'm really curious. Seems like quite rigid. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that my experience with gender is very fluid. There are often a lot of environments, particularly within engineering, where I find a lot of power in appearing more feminine and dressing very girly, particularly as I'm like approaching my iron ring ceremony. There's something very exciting to me about getting to be in that environment and perceived a certain way. That in a lot of other environments, I would have a different reaction to that perception. That adds to the confusion.
I bet. But that's really interesting that you're making a point of being like, I'm showing up in this field and I'm going to like really go hyper